Hello, everyone. This is Ajahn Nisabho. Usually, this is our Monday afternoon question and answer session, which is just a chance for everyone to come together and discuss Dhamma for a time. So, welcome, and feel free to post or paste any questions or topics you'd like to discuss in the chat, and we'll try to go through them. Great. So, thank you, Sangamita at the Canmore Theravada Buddhist community for always having good questions. The question here is, or rather the invitation, is to make some comments on gladdening the mind. So the word for joy, which is related to the verb to gladden the mind, is pamoja. And the term in the Anapanasati Sutta, or mindfulness of breathing, discourse on mindfulness of breathing, for gladdening the mind, is chittang abhipamodayang. And this is a really interesting topic, actually. On a broad level, it's essential in that Longpo Pasano has a phrase he uses frequently, or a reflection, where he says that usually we believe that once we get samadhi, once we achieve unification of mind, then we will be happy. But we have it backwards. It's that once we're happy, we can achieve unification of mind. And I think this is a good reflection on the path as a whole. We so frequently in the West tend towards falling in love with the practice itself, the meditation, and the high wisdom teachings, say. And there's a lot of benefit to that. But what we forget is that the more robust qualities or practices that are easier to access, such as giving, keeping morality, these, in the list of the 10 spiritual perfections, paramitas, these are first. These are the basis: dana, sila, giving, morality. And you go to Thailand, and it's a culture in which Buddhism is threaded through every aspect of life in many cases. And not that it's a perfect culture, but for example, about 30% of the Thai language is Pali, is based in Pali. It's that deep in the culture. And what you see is this aspect of giving has just brightened people so much. There's a reason they call it the land of smiles. And my feeling is that this is a large missing puzzle piece in the West, is this joy in giving. I've heard the phrase used for kind of this sort of classic middle-class suburbanite, of which I certainly identify, or was, as a layman, as the frozen people. And I think there's a great deal to be said for what happens when we open up our boundaries a bit and give, and that the mind, after one has given, is much more easily concentrated. And this is perhaps almost most beautifully, I think sometimes it takes a bit of work to cultivate this at a deep level. And I've mentioned this before, but there's a practice that Ajahn Kovilo saw in his time in Sri Lanka, where the practitioners would make a determination to not eat until they had given something to someone. And I know my parents have done this for a time, where they've before tried to give something every day. And I think that probably dinner is a bit more feasible than breakfast in terms of what you hold off eating. But just recently, someone close to where I'm living also took this on. One of the stewards at the house here for a bit, and the just had a pretty powerful interaction from just one moment of sort of stepping out of a comfort zone and giving something, and it's really beautiful. So I think that gladdening the mind can work on this broad level. Also, but on the meditation level, in the Anapanasati Sutta, first, several times in the suttas, the Buddha says that the happy mind is easily concentrated. He stops there frequently. And there's a sutta called Volition, Anguttara 10's, the numbered discourses, where the Buddha says, for a mind that is glad, no volition needs to be exerted. Let my mind become concentrated. It is natural that a mind that is glad becomes concentrated. And similarly, in the Anapanasati Sutta, when you get to, it's a robust sutta with 16 steps, and there's much to go into, but the steps 9 through 12 have to do with the mind. They correspond to the mind as a foundation of mindfulness. And they go, or they direct one to become sensitive to the mind, to gladden the mind, to concentrate the mind, and to liberate the mind. So my sense of these steps is, in the previous steps, one has, in turns, cultivated a robust breath energy in the body and sort of nourished the body with a sense of fulfillment. And then after a time, the body, nourished, becomes still and full. And it's almost like, this is frequently when a nimitta, what we call a sign of light, begins to manifest in the visual field of brightness, or when the sound of silence becomes very apparent, which is a meditation object that's a subtle hissing or singing in the ears, ringing in the ears. And then perceptions and thoughts drop away, or perceptions and feelings, chitta sankhara in Pali, drop away, and what you're left with is the mind, which is this is when you've achieved this, or arrived at this third foundation of mindfulness embodied in these steps. And I think it can be very disorienting for people when they've come to this place in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. So frequently we have all of these concepts and this mental landscape we've formed, even the residual perception of the body as a sort of form, or even frequently by that point in the meditation, it's almost just a concept of sort of a wide bubble of awareness and light. But it's still a residual perception. So when we let even that go, there's this sense of disorientation which can take hold. And frequently, the mind, it's almost like the canvas, and the writing on the front of the canvas has dropped away, and all you're left with is the mind, this bright, empty canvas. But that can be disorienting. So usually what is very helpful for me at that stage is dropping in a perception of joy. And this is the gladdening the mind. So this can manifest as dropping in a thought of metta, of loving kindness. May I be happy. May I be filled with love, or just love. Frequently, the mind will be subtle enough at this point that it won't want to use full sentences. So sometimes all you get is enough kind of volition to drop in a word every now and again, and then just step back and let it ring. So love. And or at this point, the sort of awareness in the body may have risen quite a lot, so that it's sort of a bubble, sometimes from about the diaphragm up above the head, whereas at the beginning of the meditation, it may be lower. But frequently, if you sort of place awareness higher up, say above the head, and visualize light, that's another way of gladdening the mind, and it feels natural and good. But what it allows is, it's as if you've taken that blank canvas, which was somewhat disorienting and strange at first, and you've dropped a bead of golden dye on it. And because the canvas was so smooth and unsullied, the Buddha frequently uses the image of cloth, white cloth. That dye spreads out and pervades and permeates the mind, or the cloth in this metaphor, extremely quickly. And similarly, these simple perceptions of light or joy or love, when the mind is that still, pervade it very quickly. And you'll see they just, the mind is so malleable that it brightens it, it gladdens it. So this is gladdening the mind. And when we do that, then the mind wants to concentrate, wants to gather. It feels comfortable at home. It feels happy. So much of our movement in the mind is it's hunger for something. It's grasping after this and that. So if you give it happiness, it doesn't want to move so much, and it can settle. And I would say that this aspect of joy is important on, it really is one of the missing ingredients for people. I think giving is one way to get to it, but also study. If one begins to memorize the suttas a little bit, even just chanting, some people really, that brings up a lot. And yeah, so if you don't have a shrine, get a shrine, chant. If you haven't learned some key suttas as a serious practitioner, it's worth memorizing a few. The Buddha's words on loving kindness. If you can learn the English, great. If you can then learn the Pali, that helps. The Mangala Sutta, the Discourse on the Highest Blessings, the basic homage to the Buddha, and these can all be found on Abhayagiri's website in their chanting book, or Amravati's, and you can find recordings there too. And then a very important sutta to learn is the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse of the setting in motion of the wheel of Dhamma, which was the first discourse the Buddha gave. And Bhikkhu Bodhi has said that it is the most profound, it's the most profound words that have ever been uttered by humanity. I would agree. The entire teaching is in that sutta, in some sense. So that's something worth applying one's mind to. And I know that I get there's places where that really brightens the mind. And also art does, poetry, things like that. So you have to play around with this, but yeah, that aspect of how you gladden the mind is a very powerful way to move towards concentration. What you see so often in the West is this sort of dryness in the practitioners, this brittleness. And I think a lot of that comes from ignoring these aspects of the heart in the practice: faith, devotion, joy, giving, living in community. So find a way to bring that into your life more and more. Good to see everyone from Chile. It's quite a ways. Kumu asks, can you please explain how Chittanupassana differs from Vedanupassana meditation for Satipatthana? So the term, for those who don't know, Chittanupassana is mindfulness of the mind, which is the third foundation of mindfulness, the third frame of reference. Vedanupassana is the basically the second foundation, mindfulness of feelings. The first foundation is mindfulness of the body. The fourth is mindfulness of Dhamma categories. And these are frameworks for looking at one's experience. And when one looks at one's body, you really see the body just as that much, without reference to other qualities or value systems such as attractive, unattractive, what it can be used for. It's just a body. And with the Dhamma categories, which is frequently the most confusing, one parses out one's mental qualities into bright, the enlightenment factors of, say, mindfulness, wisdom, energy, etc., and the negative mental qualities that are present, the hindrances such as sensual desire, etc. And Vedanupasana is mindfulness of feeling, which is, it's very interesting. In the sutta, it talks about looking at one's feelings in terms of positive or pleasant, painful, and neutral. But then it speaks about worldly feelings and otherworldly feelings, or spiritual feelings. And whereas unpleasant, and neutral of the worldly sort are simple enough, pleasant sense experience, painful sense experience, neutral. Spiritual feelings entail a whole nother realm of positive spiritual feelings would be loving kindness, etc., concentration. Neutral would be equanimity. Painful would be remorse over past deeds, that like wholesome remorse, and a desire to progress on the path, and or discontent with one's current spiritual attainment, basically. Chittanupasana frequently implies a sort of broader conception of the mind. Mindfulness of mind is, you're looking at a broader scope of things. So in the sutta, this is, one sees the contracted mind is contracted, the distracted mind is distracted, the exalted mind is exalted, the unexalted mind is unexalted, liberated, unliberated, concentrated, unconcentrated, etc. So I think for me, it can be, perhaps it's easiest for me to speak to in terms of breath meditation, because that is a practice I really value, is that mindfulness of feelings is somehow the bridge between the body and the mind. And in the first 4 steps of the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, one is becoming aware of the whole body, sort of anchoring one's awareness on the breath, that's short, long, etc. Then you're expanding awareness to encompass the whole body, working to drop the awareness a bit into the heart, or at least to access that, calming down the explicit motion of the lungs, so that the subtle energy of the breath courses up and down the meridians, up the spine, down the front of the body, or up this front of the body and down the spine. And this access to the body leads one to steps 5 through 8, which are mindfulness of feelings. And this is when one accesses feelings such as piti in Pali, P-I-T-I, which is a sense of refreshment flowing through the body. When one accesses sukha, pleasure, and the sense of filling of the body. And these are subtle qualities that somehow are halfway between the mind and the body. And perhaps they might be thought of as the fine sense. In Buddhist cosmology, there's a realm of existence called the fine sense spheres, which seem to be halfway between gross material and purely mental realms. So when one cultivates that mindfulness of feeling and pervades the body, with it once again, it's as if this canvas has all those perceptions and feelings, I think of them as the writing on the canvas. And when they begin to become calm, then they can drop away and you're left with just the mind. And it's a simpler thing and broader, I'd suppose. Um, I know Ajahn Nisabho says that, I think he says that thoughts and perceptions, chitta sankhara, something like this, are like committee members in the mind. And a mind state is what the decision that the committee members all come to. So I think when this happens, say you're debating over doing something, in your head, something say you shouldn't do. There's different narratives going on, debating back and forth. But once something is clicked and you're in that greed-fueled state, something fundamental has shifted, a decision has been made, and the mind is completely colored by it. So that's the mind state happening or being known. I've spoken to how you use those two foundations just earlier. But I suppose apart from breath meditation, in sitting, I think, a lot of it comes down to just seeing the color of the mind. And also there can be a lot of insight there in terms of if one is just seeing grumpiness come up again and again, really seeing that those thoughts aren't the key thing. It's as if they're images playing on a movie screen. But if you can infer the fact that there's a aversive state, mind state behind that all, that's very useful. It lets you believe in them less. And it's as if the movie screen, you see that it's dark and stained. And then you understand why all the images on the screen look blotchy and dark and stained as well. And that movie backdrop, the canvas upon which the projector is projecting images, that could be thought of as the mind. And if you can affect that mind state, first of all, if you can know what's going on, but behind those images, it is very helpful. But then also using those calm moments to mold that mind state has huge impact and ripple in terms of all the thoughts which get displayed on it afterwards in a day. This is why meditation is so powerful. You're coming down to the core. You are stopping the projector for a time, which lets you find the little stains on that canvas and clean them off and straighten out the wrinkles. And then when that projector inevitably starts again, the images are beautiful and clean and bright in a way that the rest of us, when we don't meditate, it's as if we're running along that movie screen as images run here and there, looking somewhat off and dirty, and we're trying to scrub them as they go. And it has no, it's of limited benefit. But if we can just turn off the projector for 30 minutes a day, go to that screen, clean it, brighten it, straighten it. Then when that projector starts rolling again, every image on it is beautified. And it's a metaphor that works, but doesn't do justice to the power of the practice and the beauty and importance of it. Maybe if it was the right movie that I could think of, then it would. I don't know. I don't get to watch movies often, so not sure what movie to reference here. There's a great movie, just a little tangent, called Amidst White Clouds. It's a documentary, I think, on YouTube for free. And it's this man who explores China, visiting these famous hermit monks, or not famous, unknown actually, and just interviewing these amazing monks. It's really beautiful. I think Amongst White Clouds or Amidst White Clouds. So that's a movie worth displaying on that screen. Oh, we are being joined by Ayatata Loka It's very good to see you, Aya. For those who don't know, Aya Tataloka is one of the most senior bhikkhunis in the West and has done an immense amount for the Sangha and is a mentor. So it's a pleasure to see you. I would like it if you would jump on this live stream somehow. So feel free to type in answers in the chat, Aya. It's great to see you. Hello, Sumana. It's good to see you. Sawaka Umaro, how did you learn food portioning? That's a good question. So this leads into a larger issue. In our Thai forest tradition, it's a bit of the fire and brimstone tradition, if you hadn't noticed. So the classic line that Ajahn Chah would exhort his monks with was eat little, sleep little, talk little. And the problem is that you take a classic self-flagellating Westerner who on some subconscious level has internalized the concept of original sin and been molded by consumerist society to believe that they're not good enough, and you plop them down in a Thai forest monastery being hit with teachings like that, and it's like mixing acid with acid. It's a bit like that scene in Monty Python with the monks hitting their heads with books. I've seen many monks hit many heads with many books, and very heavy ones. If anyone has seen the Nikayas, they're heavy books. So it has to be adjusted. The Buddha in the Pali Canon can come across as fierce and wrathful. But these were in cultures, Thailand and ancient India, where, first of all, they were deeply embedded in tight social constructs and bonding. And they are imbued with a sense of loving kindness at a very deep level. The Thais, there's a famous story of someone trying to translate what self-hatred was to the Dalai Lama. And it took minutes. And after the Dalai Lama had understood, he started crying. And he said, why do people do that? And they said, it's just what we do in the West. And to be fair, I think these terms West and East are somewhat problematic now. I think your average metropolitan Thai would be in exactly the same boat, or almost. And that same conversation with self-hatred happens and has happened with Thai teachers, because there's just a sense of metta below the surface there. And so these teachings, I think it's very important to balance out with a lot of loving kindness and gentleness. And so often we want to jump in. You see this in practitioners. You want to jump in and really push yourself. And that's useful at times. There's practices called the Dhutangas. So one thing we do in our tradition is in some monasteries, you stay up one night a week, just not sleeping. You sit all night, and you push yourself into long sits. I personally I don't do well without sleep, but I do very well fasting. So I've fasted for long periods before, and frequently, and that helped me a lot. But while those practices, the Dhutangas, are useful in certain bursts and in certain places in one's life, the metric or the guiding language for Westerners, I think, is much, much more helpful when it's couched in terms such as balance, harmony, beauty, gentleness, duty. One's whole trajectory on the Dharma path, I think, is much better guided by that, and by community, bringing that into. So this is a long way of working around the general ethic behind food portion questions, because You go to Thailand and people tell you eat little, sleep little, speak little, and then you're miserable for 3 years, which is what happened to me. And I'd say that Ajahn Sumedho, uh, when asked about this admonition, says a better metric might be to eat enough, eat just enough, sleep just enough, speak just enough. It's a pretty classic experience for sort of newly ordained monks to go back to their families and you're trying to be extremely mindful and speak only Dhamma. And it's just really awkward at the dinner table. Not that you're having dinner, but you're sitting there glaring at everyone. So it's funny how off we can get when we're approaching the spiritual path, actually. But this admonition to eat enough, sleep enough, speak enough, it's good. And I'd say what you aim for in terms of food portioning is, enough to leave the body light. And one of the reasons we eat one meal a day in our tradition, and before noon is, and the Buddha recommended it again and again and again, is because by the evening your body's light and buoyant and the meditation is quite good. This is why it's traditional in Asian cultures for lay people to take the 8 precepts one day a week during the full moon, half moon, and new moon days, the Uposatha day, as we call it, the Sabbath. And I think that's a really important thing for practitioners to do. Find one day that you can aim at practice more. Turn off the social media, turn off the phone, sit. And not eating afternoon can help with that. It just takes some work to figure out the right portions. I'd say counting mouthfuls is something monks frequently do. Another one is sort of, the thing is it can go wrong. I mean, people can be pretty intense about their body image already. So calorie counting and stuff can be a bit too much, but you can get a general feel for how much you eat and then still feeling bright and buoyant afterwards. And that's what you aim for. Savaka Umaro, do you eat once a day? Yes, I do. Some people don't. Some monks, the Buddha didn't require it. He admonished his monks to eat before midday, only before midday. And then after that, we can have fruit juice and chocolate and such, dark chocolate, which, trust me, you can't fill yourself up on. So the idea was to keep things simple for the lay people and for us, and to focus on practice. And actually, recent research has showed that in the cells, they kick into a different sort of cleanup mode when they don't have anything to eat, or no nutrients, where they sort of get rid of all the old trash. And if you're always eating 3 meals a day, they never kick into that mode, which is why fasting is so powerful. And the eating 1 meal a day actually allows them to kick into that same mode every day. So the Buddha was onto something, as he usually is. So while he required the monks to stop eating at midday, he recommended frequently that they eat 1 meal a day, again and again. And it's a staple of our tradition. Some monasteries don't completely do it. They have a work period in the morning, for example, and people need to get some strength if they're going to work with chainsaws. And also, some people it's good that they have breakfast. I've lived with some aversive types who you don't want to be living in community with them for 5 hours of every day before they've had the meal. It's like, some people, it's really wholesome just to take a breakfast meal or eat enough. But I personally am a greed type. So sort of constraining that to 1 meal a day is helpful. And I think it's a lovely practice for me. I think that there's an interesting point here in terms of what I'll call the sila, the ethics of simplicity, the sila of simplicity. A lot of these Dhutanga practices, a lot of these ascetic practices are above the call. They're really obvious ways of pushing yourself. For example, going without sleep 1 night a week, or sometimes, and just sitting all night, or walking, sitting, etc. Those are fun, actually. They do get you moving, and into the practice in a really fun way. As I certainly enjoy having that sharp edge on my life and practice. And I think eating one meal a day does help with that for me. It has that quality. But other ones are that there's one admonition where when you wake up, you get up. I had to add a caveat to that when I took that on. I don't do it at the moment, although I have a certain. Basically, if I've had a certain amount of sleep, then I do get up, but with the allowance for small naps later if I need them. But when I first took it on, I didn't have that caveat, which meant I sometimes would sleep for like 5 minutes and wake up and be like, oh no. So those were unpleasant nights. But those are all ways of really pushing yourself, and they're interesting and fun. But there's a certain level of morality, sila, and renunciation, which is just simple. And that's beautiful and very graceful in people, I find. So I think one meal a day can have that quality to it. But so can just really narrowing down the number of items you have and possessions, simplifying your circle of friends a bit, putting down some of those balls which we all are so taken up juggling. I think that ethic of simplicity is a beautiful one. The word sila, morality, it always reminds me of a bell, than the sound of it. But I don't think the bell needs to be empty if it's going to ring purely. And when you have so many balls in the air in life, it's very hard to give the attention and love that each deserves. And so it's hard to keep a good ethical standard. How can you give the attention and follow up to every friend you have if you have so many? So sometimes I think there's a place for really stepping back a little bit and putting down some of them. And only then can you really find a way to hold all your duties with the care that perhaps they deserve. Luke says, I met a monk recently who would weigh himself every day. Not sure why. Maybe relating to food portioning, as you mentioned. Yeah, I think it is sometimes just hard to, if you eat one meal a day, like things can go up and down quite a lot. And I know some monks who do that as well. Yeah. Anyways, I think this is plenty for today. So, there's just some inspiring stories that the recollection of the Dhutanga, those ascetic practices, brought up for me. We don't realize in the West quite what sort of beings still exist in the world, I think. And meeting some of those beings was one of the greatest blessings of my life and has affected what I think a human being is capable of. So just to name a few, I lived with this sort of hidden teacher who is not famous, but should be, who for 3 months, I think he just didn't lie down. And he never leaned against anything either. And this teacher had amazing samadhi, concentration. In Thailand, frequently the people will come and ask for things to be blessed, cars, babies, cell phones, anything. And I saw him bless people before, and every hair on his arm stood straight up. Another thing I saw was he had such loving kindness that frequently animals would just come to him. So we had a tortoise wandered in the monastery, and we sort of fed it a little bit and found a little place for it. And then it randomly would just walk over to his kuti and just wait in front of his door, waiting for him. And I never met him, but his loving kindness was so palpable. That was very lovely. And there's many more stories like that. Ajahn Liam, I've spoken of this before, the current head of our tradition at Wapapong, usually would wake up around 3 a.m. and just receive visitors and work nonstop until, say, 10 p.m. And I had a monk friend who was his assistant, and Ajahn Liam would sort of have three assistants frequently, on a rotating schedule to keep up with him. But even they couldn't completely. So he would pretend to go to bed, um, in a little glot, a umbrella tent that he kept under his hut. And then after his assistants had gone off to rest, he would get up again and wander off into the monastery and go do other work. Monks would find him, at 2 a.m. or so, fixing broken pipes, say in Ajahn Shah old hospital kuti. So the power of the mind that has accessed samadhi like this, it's, I think, hard for us to totally conceive of, but it's pretty amazing to see. So that'll be enough for now, but there are other good stories like that, for someday. Anyways, I hope everyone is well. Take care. Just to put this out there, this Saturday, August 7th, we're having a day-long retreat with myself, Ajahn Kovilo, and Ayasoma, the co-founder of Empty Cloud Monastery in New Jersey. She's live streaming in. Ajahn Kovilo and I will be in person. So it's this Saturday. You can register on our website, but do register online. And if you're in the Seattle area or near it, you can come in person. It's all free. We're in a church called Fauntleroy Church, which is very beautiful. So all are welcome to either join the live stream or show up in person. And hopefully we see you all soon. So take care, stay safe, be well.